So there's a really twisted concept of theft in this country. We think of theft as, oh, someone stealing a candy bar or someone breaking into a car. And we think of those when we think of theft. That's like the images that come to our mind. When in reality, the biggest theft in the entire country is actually the stealing that is done by corporations. Corporations have by far the largest theft rate, period. And they steal from their employees. Wages that do not get paid to people is ridiculous. The amount of fraud that goes on is crazy. And the amount of subsidizing that the corporations get is absurd. Corporations are responsible for almost all theft, despite the fact that people's cars do get broken into, and despite the fact that every once in a while someone takes a candy bar. Almost all theft, like the highest percentage of it, comes from corporations because it's so much larger, like billions and billions of dollars more than theft from any other source. In the United States, we subsidize corporations, and we also only enforce a minimum wage. Between the two things, corporations just get away with ridiculous amounts of price gouging, profit margin increasing, and they treat their employees, unfortunately, with not very much dignity. The lack of dignity is in and of itself a whole subject that needs to be addressed, but I'm specifically going to try to focus only on the financial aspects of it. The taxpayers in the United States each year, just on the programs needed to make up the difference between survival and minimum wage, taxpayers pay $6.2 billion a year trying to make up the difference. Someone working at, say, Walmart, making minimum wage, is then going and having to get food stamps and SNAP. They're having to get, child care coverage. They're having to get Medicaid. They're having to get all these programs to help them because they're not getting paid enough by their employer to actually subsist. And when people hear that, a lot of times they say, oh, well, those are starter jobs. Teenagers are supposed to work in the restaurants and they're supposed to work in retail. That's not supposed to be like a grown-up job. But any job in the United States, no matter what job it is, should provide at least the ability to subsist. Even if it was, say, some college student or something, they should still be able to survive, and they can't. Even jobs that are supposedly not baby jobs don't pay an actual livable wage. According to research on the matter, a livable wage in the United States of America would be more like $20 to $26 an hour. And yet we're still fighting to get to 15. For the costs of things, for the desperation of things, for actual rent and housing costs, to be able to keep up with all of that, the livable wage would also have to come up, and it doesn't. And yet the prices of all these things continue. I've heard people argue quite a bit that if you raise the minimum wage, it's gonna make all those things go up. But that's a weird argument considering they go up anyway. It's not like they don't go up unless minimum wage comes up. They go up anyway. So why wouldn't you try to make it so that people can afford to keep up with those prices? The reason is because corporations don't want that. For all the subsidies and the welfare programs and things of that nature that taxpayers pay for, the corporations, the difference between a actual livable wage and the cost of all of that, for the taxpayers of this country, including myself, it is $150 billion a year that taxpayers would save if corporations actually had to pay for themselves and had to pay their workers a livable wage. Now, you might say, oh, that $150 billion a year, they would just add it to the cost of their products and goods. Maybe. But we also have a very high rate of overproduction in this country. 49% of food that we make gets thrown out. We don't even use the majority of the stuff we make. It just gets turned into pollution. So they could cut costs by not making as much crap. There's also that people argue, oh, well, if they have to actually pay those costs, they'll do more layoffs. It'll cost jobs. But they're doing layoffs anyway. I mean, they do that anyway. So obviously it's not the minimum wage that's causing that, because the federal minimum wage hasn't been raised in like 20 years. You know, you look at the reasoning that people offer for corporations to not have to actually pay their fair share, and for taxpayers to have to bear the brunt of that, and they're all things that are already happening. Corporations can become global empires, buying up other names and brands and businesses, totally consolidating, monopolizing markets. And we're trying to protect them from what? They already are exploiting all of us. Like, what is the goal here? I see people sometimes say, oh, well, if, you know, the livable wage happens, then I currently right now only make that much money. But I went to school for years and I have a way harder job than these people flipping burgers and stuff. If you feel that way, then you should absolutely advocate for better wages for yourself. Instead of saying, oh, the little people who are starving and can't afford housing shouldn't be able to have those things, you should be saying, whoa, I'm worth way more than what I'm getting. Why am I only getting a 1 or 2% raise a year when inflation is like 5%? Why am I getting less of a raise than the devaluation of money? You should be a little offended. I mean, seriously. If you think about it, it's kind of ridiculous. A person who pays, you know, say $5,000 in their taxes, $3,000 of that is going towards subsidizations and programs to make up for corporations. Very little of your taxes actually goes toward infrastructure or rebuilding things. Unfortunately, a whole bunch of it goes to the military, but in actuality, the maintenance of things is really small. Welfare programs in and of themselves are actually really small, like super small. They are, man, I think it was, if it's 3,000 for subsidization, that it's less than $20 for the welfare programs. Like, they're actually almost nothing, and yet they're the thing that gets complained about all the time, and not the subsidizations for the corporations. The other thing is, corporations don't really pay their taxes very well. They either get loopholes so that they don't have to pay almost anything, or else they flat out say, hey, IRS, we know we owe this, we know we're supposed to make changes, we'll do it eventually, here's a letter saying we hope we can do it by this date. They do that a lot with regulations as well. Say they have a slap on the wrist for something they did in a food manufacturing plant. They write a letter saying, oh yeah, we'll fix this eventually, and then they have years to do that. They don't have to do it right away. A lot of corporations, I mean, seriously, the majority of them have a crap ton of debt, and they play this game where they're trying to keep their worth higher and keep the debt there so that they can do tax write-offs for the debt. But it means that they are always on the edge of spending too much. And so then they transfer that extra expenditure onto their customers. So the taxpayer, who's already paying to subsidize the costs of goods, who's already paying to subsidize the lack of wages for the employees, is now also paying higher prices due to the company trying to maintain its infinite growth. It's not sustainable. The entire way it's set up and the lack of regulations on it is not sustainable. So the next time you start arguing in favor of a corporation, getting to do whatever it wants, maybe ask yourself why you're doing that. Do you really think that they're giving you such a great deal? Do you think maybe someday you'll be a small business owner, and if the rules apply to the big corporations, then they might apply to you as a small business owner, because small business owners do get some differences. Maybe you are worried that it'll hinder your ability to climb the ladder and grow your career and become some, district manager or something. But that's not true. Your job, your ability to climb with your job is not dependent on how much you get exploited. It might seem that way because corporations have gotten away with doing that for so long, but in reality, you have worth and value. Without you, they don't have products. Without you, they don't have profits. So maybe reconsider your worth, and maybe be a little offended that they treat you like you're worth so little. The average taxpayer is paying way too much to basically make it so that corporations can just relax. Unfortunately, there was a ruling that made corporations have the same rights as a person, which means they can even donate and stuff, just like a person, even to things that corporations should have no say in the matter of, like politics. But the thing is they got the rights of a person without any of the personal responsibility. And you might say, oh, if I sue a corporation, they gotta deal with that. But almost all lawsuits against corporations end in just them not even going to court. Almost all lawsuits end in settlements. And you might say, oh, well, if something happens, there are rules for the corporations that, are enforced on them, but they're enforced pretty lackadaisically, and quite frankly, there's not nearly enough. If the average citizen isn't allowed to get away with something, a corporation should not be allowed to get away with it either. And unfortunately, they absolutely can, because they can go global, and different rules in different countries, and they can just spread their tendrils out, and anyone who hasn't bought their product yet, they get to expand. And they use conquering language like, to do it. Oh, let's, take over this market. Let's kill the competition. They are aggressive. And if a company can get away with that, why wouldn't they? They're just lining their pockets and exploiting people and resources. A government, they have elected officials. If the people don't like the way the government's doing something, in a democratic elected government, they can try to do something about it. They can try to elect different people. They at least have some sort of opportunity to do something of some sort. Not always effectively, but something. But a corporation, they're rich. They have the GDP of whole countries. And yet, they weren't elected. They're not actually interested in the well-being of human beings. They're not caring about citizens. And so they just can buy influence and do whatever they want. And what would be considered an act of war by a country taking over a market or an area is just considered savvy business style, because it's a corporation. And it doesn't matter who it hurts. It doesn't matter if it's fair. And quite frankly, the taxpayers in the country are the ones paying for it. It's a not good thing. You did not elect the people running the board. You did not elect the CEO. And that corporation still controls so much of your life. Think about it. Be a little offended.